Hello and welcome to Casual Marketing. I'll be your host, Just James, and today I want to talk about the Facebook Audience Manager, which is a tool that exists within the Meta Business Suite, which I went over a little bit in my last video, but essentially it's a tool that Meta created to house all of their product offerings, whether that's organic or even paid. And one of the tools within that, one of the most important in my mind, is Facebook Audience Manager. If you didn't catch my last video, you'll want to head over to business.facebook.com and then click All Tools. If you're wondering why Audience Manager is important, you just have to understand that it's a tool that's designed to capture engagement, whether that's from video views, someone entering a landing page, or just engagement on your page as a whole. Audience Manager also offers powerful tools like creating lookalike audiences, which essentially takes your data that you've provided and then creates an audience that is similar to what you've submitted. There are some caveats to that. Audiences do need to be at least 1,000 in size in terms of how much data there is, but it's a very powerful tool. You use it directly within Ads Manager once you get everything set up, and it is something that a lot of marketers are using. I don't know if they're using it to their fullest.
Potential, lots of potential, yes.
If you are familiar with Audience Manager, I still think this video is really important because it's changed dramatically over the last couple of years. Almost every year, Facebook has made some type of change to Audience Manager in terms of how it works. A couple of years ago, you weren't even able to search by campaign. So I think it's important to look at some of these tools that we use on a daily basis. And if you've never used it before, I am going to take a deep dive. So now on my screen, I have the Meta Business Suite pulled up, which is the main page that I went over in the last video. This is a good place to start. You actually can get here by going to, once again, business.facebook.com. And what you'll want to do is immediately navigate to All Tools. And once that loads, you'll see a lot of these tools, but the main one we want to talk about today is Audiences. Okay, so now we are in Facebook Audience Manager. And I actually am basically using a brand new account, so this is what you will see if you have never set up an audience. You're immediately greeted with a couple key options. So I want to go over how to actually set up your first audience. So what we'll do is we'll go here to create a custom audience, and you'll immediately see there are quite a few options. So under your sources, there's website, app activity, catalog, customer list, and offline activity. So just a brief overview of what these settings are. Website is what will allow you to track if someone is going to your landing page. It will require you to put proper code on your site, so just keep that in mind that you can't just turn this on without doing any work at all. So just be prepared for that. App activity is if you have an app and you want to do the same thing, you install some code, the Facebook SDK, and now you're able to track that information. Catalog information can be if you are syncing your products to Facebook. Really good way to capture audiences there on how they're interacting with it. Customer list is what most people will be using, which is if you have a list of emails. Keep in mind you're going to want over 1,000 people in that list when you submit it. The minimum is 1,000, but when we're talking about email, Facebook has to pair them with individual users, and people tend to have multiple email addresses. So if the one that you have from your database and the one that they use on Facebook is different, Facebook might not be able to match them. So to be safe, you usually want a couple thousand to start any campaign that's going to use this information. Beyond that, you have meta sources, and these are sources that actually come from Meta themselves. So Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger, and a couple other tools that are constantly being expanded out. So you'll see video, you can do lead forms, which is to collect email addresses and other pieces of information, instant experiences, AR experiences, which is relatively new when people are using different types of filters and overlays on Facebook listings, the Instagram account itself, which some of these are actually relatively new in terms of being able to bring Instagram follower data into Audience Manager. You can also utilize events, Facebook pages, and then shopping options on Facebook. So there's two in particular that I want to break down because I think they'll be some of the most common where people will get started. And first we'll do video. So most advertisers are using video content and not just static. So this is a pretty good opportunity that most people will have access to. So the moment you select it and you hit next, you'll see engagement, which gives you a couple more options. So what you're doing is you're basically deciding how long did they engage with that video content. This is a really nice feature because if you have a couple minute long video, you may not care if they just watch 3 seconds. You may want them to watch at least half of it. Or you might have a shorter video and you just want them to watch a couple seconds to be able to later remarket to them. So having this specific of a breakdown is very important. So right now I have selected people who viewed at least 3 seconds of your video, but I still have to choose the actual video that I want to track. So when I click choose videos, you'll immediately be greeted with video source and Facebook page. If you manage a lot of pages, it typically is kind of random on what it opens. So you will want to select this and make sure you select the proper page that you want to access. And then video sources is also really important. So you can either pull from your specific Facebook page, just something that was posted organically. You could pull it from the Instagram profile. You could even pull it from a specific campaign in Ads Manager, and you can just pull directly from the video ID. This option here, especially if you are dealing with a larger operation where you're going to have lots of different variations of video, this is probably one of the most important steps you're going to take, and this is where you need to be most diligent with the decision that you make. The way to think about video in Audience Manager is that the moment you upload a video, it is assigned a video ID. If you upload a video organically and post it, and then you go to Ads Manager, and instead of boosting that post, you upload the video again and then put different text, it now has a different video ID. So you have to be very careful with what you're going to pick when you're building these audiences, and make sure you're picking from the correct source. So you'll want to be very careful when you're making these selections, because if we scroll down, you can actually see that there's not a whole lot of search options available. There's just a next page option. I can select dates, which is helpful, and there is last used date and upload date, but there is not a specific search to look at a particular name of a video. So if you don't have the video ID and you're not careful about how many times you uploaded the video, you could have it in multiple places collecting separate audiences. You have to be very careful with this, and that is why you will want to keep good track of where videos are uploaded and try and prevent them from being uploaded multiple times. But once you have that figured out, you would just go down here and you would select every video that you cared about. They'll show up in the selected video column, and then you would hit confirm. And now you have the option to pick retention, which is how long they can remain in the audience. There are many limitations to this system depending on what you are choosing to capture. Right now it says the maximum time is 365 days, but just keep in mind when you're creating audiences to really pay attention to how long do you want to keep that audience, and make sure you attend to that audience before it expires, because you will immediately lose all of that data once it reaches expiration. So if I go back over here to where I actually decide on what source I want to collect, let's go over website real quick. So I go to website, I hit next, and because this has never been set up before, it's immediately trying to get me to set up the actual pixel itself so it can track the data, which is nice that it's giving me that information immediately. So let's go ahead and hit continue. And now's where I'll get some really interesting options. So right at the top here, include people who meet any of the following criteria. I can change that to all. So basically I can narrow that, or I can expand it based on what I'm trying to go for here. So under source, you'll see it's red because I haven't set up my tracking yet. I haven't set up a pixel for this account. So you'll want to make sure you do all of that before you do this. Make sure if you have someone that you have to work with that has to install code on the website, make sure all of that gets handled first. Once you get everything figured out in terms of the pixel and making sure it's all connected, now is where you can do some really interesting combinations. So you can do everyone who's ever visited that website and basically hit that pixel. You can do people who visited specific web pages, where it'll allow me to actually select the specific URL. So if you have different landing pages, or if you're only concerned with a specific page. And then if I go up here, I can do visitors by time spent. This is really good for e-com, especially if you have a lot of traffic going to your site and you kind of want to sift out the people that are just window shopping. You can actually go by visitor time spent and figure out who is spending the most time on your site and then target them specifically if they haven't made a purchase. Very powerful tool. It does require a fair amount of data though, so if your traffic is relatively low and it's a new website, just keep that in mind that this won't be as useful in the early days, but for later on it can be relatively powerful. And you'll notice if we go to retention, the maximum time is now only 180 days from 365 from the previous one. So something to keep in mind when you're going to look at people on a landing page, it will not last as long if that is all you are going to do. So keep that in mind wherever you're going to send people. If you're trying to track information and maintain that data, you may want to ask for an email if you can't get them to make a purchase, just to really extend these data points as much as you specifically can. And if we go down here, what you'll see is include more people. So I could basically create additional rules if I wanted to do a mixture of visit a specific page and then also spent a large amount of time there. So it is nice to immediately be able to broaden this audience or narrow the audience with things like exclusions. So I can block certain people that are visiting the site, maybe from specific sources. All right, so now we're still in Audience Manager, but this is what the page will actually look like once you've built your first audience. You get a couple more pieces of data, and this is what you'll see if an account has already been created and is using audiences. So you'll see a few columns like name, type, estimated audience size, availability, date created, and whether or not you're sharing it with another ad account. Another really useful feature that I'll probably go over in another video. But what you'll want to keep in mind is the estimated audience size. So I just created this test audience. It doesn't really have anything in it. It's still populating, but it has less than 1,000. So it will continue to say below 1,000 even once it finishes quote unquote populating. And all it's trying to do is match users with these data points so that you can then retarget to them. So this can take a while. It depends on the account size. It depends on how big the audience is. So this is not something to do if you're in a rush. You'll want to set these up and probably wait in some cases a couple of days. It just depends on what you're trying to track. But eventually, if you have more than 1,000 data points, this will give you an estimate. It's typically within a range. Don't focus on it too much, but you definitely want to get a fair amount of data. Some of the cool things you can do once it finishes, however, is you can go over here and hit select, and you'll see edit, share, delete, and then you'll see these 3 dots. The most important tool that they have is create lookalike, which I'll go over in a second, but you can also see show audience overlap. And so if you have 2 audiences that have a fair amount of data, you can actually see the overlap of those audiences. It requires a good amount of information for Facebook to display that to you, unfortunately because of privacy concerns, but it is a nice tool if you have these fairly large audiences and you just want to understand how many are actually overlapping within them. So after I hit create lookalike, you'll see that there are a couple options. First, I have to select the actual source that I want to use, and because I have an audience that hasn't fully adjusted yet, this is giving me a couple errors, but essentially I just want to go to my original test source that I have. So now that I've selected test, now I have to select location. So you want to be very careful with this on who you're trying to target. In this case, we're going to focus on United States. So once you get done with location, you'll see select audience size. And the first option is the number of lookalike audiences you want the program to create. And you can go up to 6. And essentially you can do different increments of these percentages when you tell it to build these different lookalikes. And so what you're telling it with this slider here is how specific do you want it to be, or do you just want it to be relatively broad? So if you do 1%, it's going to find really close people to these factors that are within your audience. So it's very narrow. It is massive in the sense that it's a 2.7 million reach, but it's not a perfect system. It doesn't really guarantee you anything. It's just trying to find similar factors between these people that engaged with your content. So you'll want to experiment with this. I've seen a lot of agencies tend to move toward a middle ground period of like 5%. So it's really personal preference to where you want to move this slider. It's good to experiment, which is why you may want to do a 1%, a 4%, or an 8%, but obviously it's going to depend on your budget. It's going to depend on how much data you actually have, because if you're just barely crossing that 1,000 threshold, this tool may not be as powerful for you. It can be hit or miss, but it is really good when you're trying to prospect and expand beyond your current audience and trying to find new customers or just find new people to engage with your content. So very powerful tool to keep in mind, and naturally you should build lookalikes whenever you accumulate a lot of data and you get new audiences. So now we've talked about how to create audiences, but I want to quickly show you how to actually apply them in Ads Manager. So the easiest way to get back to Ads Manager from here is just click on the 3 lines where it says All Tools, and you'll typically see Ads Manager right here at the top under Shortcuts. If you don't, you'll just have to find it in the list here where you'll also see Ads Manager. And there we go. Now we're back in Ads Manager. So let's pretend to set up a campaign just so you can see where this is used. If you remember from my last video, Ads Manager is split into 3 categories. You have campaigns, which is your objective. You have ad sets, which is your demographics. Then you have ads, which is your creative assets. So first we have to start with the campaign. It doesn't matter what the objective is in this moment here. So we're just going to click on awareness and go to continue. And since Ads Manager is where we make demographic decisions, that's where we're going to go to select our audiences. So what you would do is navigate quickly to Ad Set, and you could scroll down, and right here under Custom Audiences, that is where all of the audiences you create will live. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that custom audiences will act as an and statement to everything you select below. So it will be they are within this audience, and within this location, and within this age, and within these genders, and within these detailed targeting. So you can break things down pretty significantly, but what you'll immediately notice when you do is that estimated audience will actually switch to unknown. And this is unfortunately due to privacy concerns that have happened over the years where people took data and then tried to layer it on with Facebook's data to get these really specific numbers, and it was just a really horrible thing that occurred. And so that's why don't be alarmed when you select a custom audience that this says unknown. As long as you can see that your audiences are the right size, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal.
I am so sorry. Was that long?
All right, so that's Facebook Audience Manager. I hope that you have a little bit more of an understanding of what the tool is for. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or you want to ask me something, you can either leave a comment or reach out to me at justjames@casualmarketing.info. I'm always happy to talk to people within the industry or people just joining it or just have a general interest. So feel free to reach out. But regardless, I hope you have a great day and see you soon.